It was a bright Monday morning in the capital city of Ouagadougou. The streets were busy as usual. Motorbikes zoomed past, people walked in a hurry, and market women called out to customers. In the middle of this noise and activity stood a small but neat shop called Bako's Superb Value Store. Inside the shop, a young man named Jonathan was arranging bags of rice and crates of canned food. He was tall, fair-skinned, and always had a serious face. Jonathan had just moved to Ouagadougou from the village. He had come to help his elder brother Bako, who owned the shop. Bako had just had a minor surgery and needed time to rest. Please, John, Bako had said, just watch the shop for 2 weeks, be polite to the customers, collect the money, and give good change. That's all Jonathan had agreed. He wanted to prove himself responsible and useful. The shop was doing well, but Jonathan was very strict. He hated people touching things without buying. He didn't like noise. He didn't like delay. If you are not buying, leave, he would say without smiling. One afternoon, as Jonathan was sweeping the front of the shop, a black SUV parked across the street. The car was long and shiny, but there were no guards or drivers nearby. A woman stepped out of the vehicle. She wore a simple dress and carried a small brown handbag. She was beautiful, graceful, and calm. It was Mrs. Mayam, the wife of President Ibrahim Traoré. But she was not dressed like a first lady. She liked to move around quietly. Without escorts, she often visited ordinary places by herself to feel connected to the people. Jonathan looked up but didn't recognize her. She smiled and walked into the shop. Good afternoon, she said kindly. Jonathan didn't reply. He just nodded and continued dusting ashel. She walked around the shop looking at different items. She touched a pack of soap, then checked the price of a bottle of cooking oil. After a few minutes, Jonathan frowned. Madam, if you're not buying anything, please leave. This is not a museum. Mayam looked surprised. Oh, I'm sorry, I was just checking the prices. I want to buy a few things. Jonathan didn't smile. Then say what you want and pay. This is not a place to wander around. The first lady smiled again, trying to stay calm. All right, please, can I have 2 bottles of foil and a bag of rice? Jonathan pointed at the shelf. Take it and come to the counter. She took the items and gently placed them on the counter. Can I pay with transfer? Jonathan rolled his eyes. Transfer number? We don't do that here. Cash only, but I don't have cash right now. I left my purse in the car. Let me just go. And Jonathan didn't let her finish. You don't have money then? Why are you here? Do you think this is charity? Miriam tried to speak, but Jonathan raised his voice. Please carry your things and go. This is how some people move around looking rich, but don't even have small money. Nonsense. The shop was quiet. A woman passing by stopped and stared. Another customers shook his head in disbelief. Mai said nothing. She gently placed the items back on the shelf. I'm sorry for the trouble, she said softly, and walked out of the shop. Jonathan muttered to himself, some people just want attention. A few minutes later, Bakosal from home. How is the shop today, John? It's fine, just annoying people who come to disturb and waste time. Bako laughed. Be patient, my brother, that's how business is. But Jonathan was still angry. Imagine one woman dressed like a madam touching everything. In the end, she said she doesn't have cash. What did she look like? Bako asked. Tall, brown skin, white dress, low voice, very calm, like someone used to being obeyed. She even had Anna's car. Bako's voice went quiet. Wait, was she wearing a gold brooch on her dress? Yes, Jonathan said. How do you know? Jonathan, that was the first lady. That was President Traoré's wife. Jonathan dropped the phone. He felt like the ground had opened under his feet. Hello. Hello, Bako shouted from the phone. Jonathan slowly picked up the phone. Again, are you serious? Yes, Bako shouted. She often visits places like that without guards. She's very humble. I even saw her picture this morning with that same white dress. Jonathan, what did you do to her? Jonathan's heart began to beat fast. Sweat rolled down his back. I told her to leave. I shouted at her. I didn't know you would. I thought she was just a regular woman. Oh no, Bo groaned Jonathan. You just shouted at the first lady. If this news spreads, we are finished. Jonathan dropped the phone again and stared into the street. He closed his eyes. What have I done? Jonathan did not sleep well that night. He kept tossing and turning in bed, thinking about what he had done. He had insulted and chased away the first lady of Burkina Faso, President Ibrahim, Traoré's own wife, and he didn't even know it. The next morning, he didn't open the shop. He just sat quietly on a bench outside, staring at the road. His hands were shaking. His brother Bako. Called him again. Jonathan. Bako said, I just got a message. What message? Jonathan asked with fear. You have been invited to the presidential house. Jonathan nearly dropped the phone again. The what? The presidential house. Yes, Bo replied. The letter came this morning. They want you to come today at 3 p.m. I am finished. Jonathan whispered, they are going to arrest me. They will put me in prison, or maybe they will disgrace me on national TV. Calm down, Bako said. You won't go alone. My wife will come with you. She will join you to go and beg the president. Together that afternoon, the two of them arrived at the presidential residence. The place was big and beautiful. Guards stood everywhere. The grass was green, the flowers were neat, and the walls looked like something from a dream. Jonathan's legs were shaking. He could barely walk. A man in a suit came and led them inside. The president is waiting, he said. They were taken to a room that looked like a palace. Beautiful chairs, golden curtains, and a calm atmosphere. President Ibrahim Traoré sat on a sofa reading a document. Beside him was the First Lady Mayam. Jonathan fell to the ground immediately and began to cry. Please, sir, I didn't know. I am sorry, Your Excellency. His brother's wife knelt beside him. Please, sir, forgive my brother-in-law, sir. He didn't know who she was. We are begging you, President. Ibrahim raised his hand gently. Stand up, he said softly. They were shocked. Slowly they stood up. I didn't invite you here to punish you, the president said. I invited you to advise you. Jonathan wiped his tears, still confused. Advise me, sir? Yes, said the president. What you did was wrong, but I want to use this moment to teach you something. He paused and then spoke in a calm but serious voice. Be good to people, all people, whether they look rich or poor, whether they talk soft or loud. Be kind always. Jonathan nodded quickly. Yes, sir. You never know who you are speaking to, the president continued. You never know who is who. The woman you chased from the shop could have been anyone's mother or your own, but you shouted at her. Jonathan lowered his head. Again, the president looked at his brother's wife. How could he say he didn't know? The First Lady Annie Sarah smiled awkwardly and answered carefully. Sir, he was not himself that day. Not himself, the president asked. She sighed. He had a heartbreak. The girl he wanted to marry left him and married someone else last week. Jonathan took it badly. He didn't talk to anyone 4 days that day. He went to the shop with a heavy heart, and he drank palm wine in the morning, which made him more angry and confused. But we are not using that as an excuse. Sir, we are very sorry. The president looked at his wife. Mim nodded gently. It's okay. I knew he didn't recognize me. That's why I didn't say anything, but this is a good lesson. Jonathan looked at her with tears in his eyes. Madam, please forgive me, even if you were not the First Lady. I had no right to speak to you like that. I will never forget this. I forgive you, Miriam said warmly, but forgiveness means you must change, not just in words, but in action. President Ibrahim stood up and walked closer. Many people think power means treating others badly, but true power is when you respect even the smallest person. Be better, smile at your customers, be fair, be patient. Jonathan nodded. I will serve from no one. I will be a better man. Andre the president added. You never know who is who. The next person who walks into your shop could be a cleaner or a king. Andy Sarah smiled with relief. Thank you, sir. Thank you, madam. God bless you. As they left the palace, Jonathan felt like a new person. In the car, he looked at Annie Sarah. I can't believe they forgave me, she smiled. Now go and show them it wasn't a mistake. Back at the shop, Jonathan opened the door slowly. He swept the floor clean, dusted the shelves, and stood by the counter with a gentle smile. That evening, when an old man with torn slippers entered the shop, Jonathan greeted him warmly. Good evening, sir. Please take your time. When a young girl came in to ask for the price of bread, he didn't shout. He said, it's 500 francs. Let me know if you need help. He had learned his lesson. He now understood that greatness begins with humility and kindness. 1 month had passed since the day Jonathan visited the presidential house to apologize. Since then, he had been doing his best to be kind and respectful to customers. Everyone in the neighborhood talked about how the shop had changed. Jonathan is now a new person, they said. He smiles, he helps, he listens. But President Ibrahim Traoré believed that true change must be tested. I don't want fake kindness, he told his security team. I want to cleanse this land of arrogance. I want people to be kind, not only when cameras are watching, but when They think no one is looking, so he called one of his most trusted guards. Corporal Daniel the president said, I want you to go to Jonathan's shop. Dress like a poor man, act like a tired traveler, tell him you're lost and have no place to stay, ask for water, ask if you can rest at the shop for a short while. Daniel was surprised. Yes, sir. You mean I should pretend? Yes, the president said, don't show your ID, don't say you work for me. This is a test. If he has truly changed, we will know the next afternoon. Corporal Daniel wore a torn shirt, old slippers, and carried a dusty bag on his back. His face was tired, and he walked slowly like someone who had been traveling all day under the hot sun. He arrived at the shop around 4 p.m. Jonathan was inside arranging some goods on the shelf. Good afternoon, sir, Daniel said in a low voice. Jonathan turned and frowned. Yes, what do you want? Please, Daniel said politely. I'm a traveler. I lost my way and my phone battery is dead. I'm waiting for someone to come and get me. Can I see outside your shop for a short while? Jonathan looked him up and down with disgust. Number never go away. Daniel was surprised. And please, I'm not asking for money, just a little space to my legs. Jonathan scoffed. You look like a thief. I don't want trouble here. Leave before you bring bad luck to my shop. Daniel nodded slowly. All right, can I just get some water then? Jonathan hissed loudly. Water? Do I look like your father? Go and drink from the gutter. Daniel smiled quietly and turned to walk away, but before he could leave, Jonathan rushed toward him and grabbed his shirt. Wait, you think I'm a fool, right? You entered my shop to steal something. Thief, somebody help me. I didn't touch anything, Daniel said calmly. Shut up, Jonathan shouted. You think I didn't see you? You stole something. I can feel it. By this time, people had started gathering outside the shop. Some passers by heard the noise and came closer. Jonathan pushed Daniel to the ground and pointed at him. Search his bag. He's a criminal. Daniel didn't fight back. He just raised his hands and kept silent. Two young men from the crowd stepped forward and were about to drag Daniel by the shirt when a voice shouted from across the street, stop there. Four plain-clothed guards who had been watching from a distance ran over and pushed the angry crowd back. Don't touch him, one of them ordered. Were you? Jonathan asked in shock. One of the guards brought out a badge and whispered into a walkie-talkie, target secured, he's safe. Jonathan stepped back, confused and afraid. What's going on? Corporal Daniels stood up, dusted his clothes, and looked Jonathan in the eye. I didn't come to rob you. I came to test you, and you failed. Jonathan blinked. What do you mean? One of the guards leaned in and whispered, you just insulted and assaulted the president's personal guard. The crowd gasped. Jonathan's knees became weak. He sat on the floor, speechless. The guards escorted Daniel back to the presidential house. That night, President Ibrahim Traoré sat quietly as Daniel gave his report. He hasn't changed, sir. He only behaves well when he knows someone is important, but when he thinks a person is poor, he treats them like dirt. The president sighed and looked out the window. I had hope for him, he said softly, but it seems his heart didn't really change. He turned to Daniel. Thank you, you did well. Meanwhile, back at the shop, Jonathan sat on the floor with his head in his hands. People were whispering outside, so he hasn't changed after all. Imagine he nearly got a man beaten. Good thing the guards were there. Jonathan's sister-in-law, Annie Sarah, arrived later that evening and found him still sitting on the floor. What happened? She asked. Jonathan told her everything. His voice was shaky. I thought he was just a dirty traveler. I didn't know it was another test. I failed again. Auntie Sarah sighed deeply. This is not about the test, Jonathan. This is about your heart. If you had truly changed, you wouldn't need to know who someone is before treating them well. He looked up slowly. What do I do now? You pray, you learn, and this time you truly change, not for the president, not for anyone, but for yourself and for God. 3 days passed. Jonathan did not open the shop. He stayed indoors, too ashamed to face the people. News had already spread. Everyone knew what had happened. Even children in the street whispered, that's the man who insulted the first lady and then tried to beat up the president's guard. Jonathan's shame was deep. He had promised to change, but he'd only changed his words, not his heart. He sat in silence, not eating much, barely talking to Auntie Sarah, who brought him food and checked on him. Then on the fourth day, a black car stopped outside the house. 2 guards stepped out. One of them knocked. Jonathan opened the door slowly. Yes, you've been called to the presidential house, one of the guards said. Right now, Jonathan's legs went weak again. He looked back at Andy. Sarah, she gave him a nod. Go, it may be your last chance. He got dressed and followed the guards. This time the presidential residence felt even larger, quieter, more serious. They led him into a small room, simple but neat. President Ibrahim Traoré was already seated reading from a brown file. The First Lady was not with him this time. Jonathan stood by the door, his head bowed. Sit down, the president said softly. Jonathan sat, his eyes on the floor. I heard what happened, the president began again. Jonathan whispered, yes, sir. The president closed the file and looked at him. You said you learned your lesson last time. I thought I did, sir, but you only changed because you were afraid, not because you understood. Jonathan swallowed hard. I gave you a second chance because I believed you were honest, but when tested by a man who looked poor, you threw away your respect, your manners, and your kindness. I am so sorry, sir, Jonathan said, tears in his eyes. President Ibrahim leaned forward. Jonathan, this is the problem in our society. We treat people based on what they wear, on how they smell, on how much money they have, but leadership, real leadership, begins with kindness to those who have nothing. Jonathan nodded, wiping his eyes. I want to change, sir, truly, not just in words. I want to start again. The president looked at him for a moment, then said, all right. Jonathan raised his head, confused. I'm giving you one final chance, the president said. Jonathan's eyes widened. Sir, you will be taken to a small community far from the city. There you'll work with a charity group, serving food, helping the sick, and learning how to treat all people with love. You will not wear fine clothes. You will not handle money. You will serve with your hands. Jonathan nodded quickly. Yes, sir. I will do it. Do it not for me, the president said, but for the people and for yourself. You understand, sir? Thank you, sir. President Ibrahim stood up, and Jonathan, this time, if you fail, there will be no third chance. I won't fail, Jonathan said firmly. I promise. He left the presidential house, not in shame, but with hope. Weeks later, Jonathan was working in a dusty village, helping old women carry water, teaching small children how to read, and serving food at the community kitchen. At first it was hard. People looked at him strangely. He wasn't used to sleeping on a mat or walking long distances under the sun, but slowly something began to change in his heart. He no longer cared about who had money or who didn't. He smiled at everyone he helped without expecting anything. One morning, while giving bread to an old blind man, he said something that made everyone around pause. Even if you have nothing, you still deserve to be treated like a king. That evening, the community leader called the president. Sir, the man said, this boy you sent, Jonathan, he has become a blessing to us. President Ibrahim smiled. Good, that means he hastily changed. Months passed, and Jonathan returned to the city, not to open a shop, but to speak to students and young business owners. He shared history, his mistakes, and his journey. He told them about the day he kicked out the First Lady, the day he almost caused a guard to be beaten, and the day he was given a second chance. People listened. They clapped, some even cried, and from that day on, in shops and markets, in taxis and offices across Ouagadougou, people began to hear a new saying: treat everyone with respect. You never know who is who, and that was how one man's failure became a lesson for a nation. Dear viewers, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, like, share with your friends, and turn on the post notification bell so you'll be the first to know whenever we upload a new video. Thank you for watching.